Graphics interpretation questions test your ability to interpret and analyze data presented visually in graphs or graphical images. For each question, you're likely to see a graph with accompanying text and several questions. As with the reading comprehension passage, you do not need to absorb every bit of information on the graph to answer the questions. What you do need to do is get the gist of the graph and what it contains so that you can efficiently find the information you need. You will then read the question stem, view the answer choices, and use the information in the graph to select the correct answer. All of the graphs are accompanied by one or two incomplete sentences. You must use a drop-down menu to select a word or phrase that completes the sentence according to the information presented in the graphic. Your first step with a question of this type should be to read the text that accompanies the graph. You may see only a single sentence, or you may see, as in this case, a full paragraph. This text is important. Although some graphics interpretation questions can be answered without reference to the text, others may feature passages containing information necessary to interpret the visual data. On test day, taking a moment to paraphrase the written information will improve your understanding of the image, speeding up your analysis, and reducing your chances of committing a careless error. Take a quick look at this passage accompanying this image. Here, the paragraph tells you that the scatter plot shows the behavior of a single geyser, Old Faithful. The graph presents two types of information: how long the eruptions of Old Faithful last, and how long it then takes before the next eruption happens. Each point on the graph represents an eruption. Next, look at the graph itself. Get a bird's eye view of the graph by reading the title and the labels of the axes, and notice how the information from the paragraph is represented in the image. You'll notice that the duration of the eruption is measured against the waiting time that follows it before the next eruption. Now, look at the units of measurement that correspond to each axis and determine whether the scales are similar. In this case, both axes are measured in minutes, but the scales are very different. The x-axis is measured in 0.5-minute increments, while the y-axis is measured in 10-minute increments. Furthermore, the x-axis starts at 1.0 and ends at 5.0, while the y-axis starts at 40 and goes to 90. Then, notice if there are any specific features mentioned in the accompanying paragraph that you see represented on the graph, such as a regression line. The final step before answering the questions is to look at the data to see if they fall into a general pattern. On this scatter plot, most of the data points separate into two distinct groups. With a pattern this clear, you can anticipate that this observation will be key to answering one or both of the accompanying questions. Making these observations before analyzing the questions will help you fill in the blanks more efficiently. Speaking of which, let's look at the questions. First, read and paraphrase the sentence with the blank. It asks about the relationship between the duration of eruptions and the waiting time between eruptions, which means that you're looking for a pattern in how the data points are arrayed on the graph. Before attempting to predict an answer, scan the answer choices. Here you see the words linear, nonlinear, positive, and negative, which indicate that the regression line may take the shape and slope of a line. There is more than one type of regression line, and in this case, the exact type of regression line has not been specified. But you should know that a regression line, however it's calculated, represents the overall trend of the points as a group. The regression line slopes upward, meaning the waiting time gets longer as the explosion duration gets longer. This is a positive relationship. Both variables tend to increase and decrease together, so you can narrow the answers down to choices A and B. Next, you need to determine whether the relationship is linear or nonlinear by looking at the shape of the regression line. You'll notice that the regression line isn't really a line because its slope changes as the amount of time gets longer. Since the relationship isn't linear through the entire data set, the answer is choice B. Take a quick look at this second question. This question might seem a little tricky at first, since the way it's worded might make you think you need to know something qualitative about the types of eruptions the geyser experiences, perhaps something about their magnitude or geological characteristics. But the GMAT will never require you to have outside knowledge beyond high school math and general knowledge of grammar and logic. All the information you need to answer this question is contained in the graph. On test day, you'll click the drop-down menu to reveal the choices. Begin by paraphrasing the question for yourself. Does Old Faithful have one, two, or more than two distinct types of eruption? As you noticed before, the data points separate themselves into two main clusters. There are a few stray data points scattered outside these clusters, but their number is not significant. Therefore, you can infer from the graph that Old Faithful has two types of eruptions, which is the correct answer. We've discussed how, before attacking any graphics interpretation question, you need to understand what the graph contains and how it's constructed. You can then target your research to answer each question correctly and efficiently. Be efficient in analyzing the information so that it will maximize your score on test day.